more we do now to mitigate the spread of the virus, the sooner that we will get through.
April is going to be a tough month. This is going to be a tough month for Nebraska.
You know, Iowans are scared and they're nervous, but we're going to get through it. And if you keep doing what we've asked you to do, we will be back to those good days. So hang in there.
People of South Dakota, the nation is watching you. They're seeing how you're responding. They're impressed with the fact that you understand what we're facing and it doesn't daunt you.
Phase 1A includes healthcare personnel.
With this, we do have a sense of a light at the end of the tunnel.
Good evening. In March of 2020, the novel coronavirus known as COVID-19 arrived in the tri-state region. Now, 1 year later, we look back on the impact this virus has had on Siouxland. Thanks for joining us for this hour-long special edition of Siouxland News, COVID-19 A Year in Siouxland. Tonight, you'll hear from local health professionals on the front lines of the fight against COVID-19 and those working tirelessly on the vaccine rollout. We revisit local return-to-learn plans and the virus's impact on education, and we speak to local business leaders and how our local economy is recovering after virus restrictions. But we begin tonight with a look at how the pandemic evolved over the last year. Here's Siouxland News at Sunrise anchor Jacob Heller.
On December 31st, 2019, the World Health Organization received the first report of a viral pneumonia in Wuhan, China. Just 9 days later, an outbreak of a novel coronavirus, COVID-19, was confirmed. The first death of this new virus was reported January 11th, and just 20 days after WHO first learned of the virus, it appeared in the U.S. By February 3rd, the U.S. had declared a public health emergency. By March 11th, the WHO declared COVID-19 a global pandemic. President Trump declared a national emergency 2 days later.
I am officially declaring a national emergency.
On April 4th, 1 million cases were confirmed worldwide. Come the end of May, the United States had documented 100,000 deaths from COVID-19. Reached 2 million confirmed cases by June 10th. On August 17th, COVID-19 had become the third leading cause of death in the nation. September 28th brought a grim global milestone: 1 million lives lost.
These flags are indicative not only of the lives lost, but of the families left behind and suffering.
The world reached 40 million confirmed cases by October 19th. By mid-December, the FDA had approved the first 2 vaccines. On January 1st, 2021, the country reached 20 million confirmed cases. By the 10th, 90 million confirmed worldwide. Just 5 days later, 2 million people were dead.
We're now on track to have enough vaccine supply for every adult in America by the end of May.
By March, millions had been vaccinated, and a third vaccine option was approved for use 1 year after COVID-19 was declared a national emergency.
Here in the tri-state, we've seen more than 652,000 people test positive for COVID-19 in the last year. Nebraska was the first state in the region to have its first confirmed case of the virus, announcing a single case of COVID-19 on Friday, March 6, 2020. The state's first 2 deaths would come on March 27th. Iowa was the next Siouxland state to confirm that the virus had come to the area, with health officials announcing its first 3 positive cases on Sunday, March the 8th. The state would have its first virus death on March 24th. South Dakota would announce its first 5 positive cases 2 days later on Tuesday, March the 10th, also announcing its first death from the virus that same day. Here's a look at each state's positive cases, recoveries, and deaths recorded 1 year after their first positive case, totaling over 656,000 positive cases and nearly 9,600 deaths from COVID-19 between the 3 Siouxland states. A heated topic throughout this pandemic has been the decision to wear a mask and statewide mask mandates. In Iowa, Governor Kim Reynolds issued a mask mandate over the winter for those who were indoors and could not social distance. That mandate was lifted February the 7th. In Nebraska, Governor Pete Ricketts never enforced a statewide mask mandate, but did require them for certain areas, such as food service and personal care businesses. While South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem never enacted a mask mandate. State health officials issued recommendations for face coverings in public where social distancing was not possible. Nebraska was one of the first states in the nation to house people in quarantine for COVID-19 following a cruise ship outbreak. More than a dozen people were brought to Nebraska Medicine in Omaha on February 17th to quarantine after an outbreak on the Diamond Princess. A handful tested positive and were treated at the hospital. It wouldn't be until March the 6th that the first confirmed case specifically in Nebraska was reported. Here in Siouxland, Dakota, and Madison County saw major outbreaks after the virus spread throughout meatpacking plants in Dakota City and Norfolk. We will revisit those outbreaks later on in the newscast. The first case of COVID-19 in the state of Nebraska was confirmed in a 36-year-old woman in Omaha. She became patient 0 as doctors worked against a virus they had never seen. Reporter Ruta Olsenida spoke with her and her father 1 year later.
Just like many Nebraskans, Ralph Hutchinson is in line to receive his COVID-19 vaccine, walking into the opportunity to be 95% protected from the virus. His daughter, Emma Hutchinson, also recently received her vaccine because both Ralph and Emma, who lives in a nursing home in Wymore, don't want to catch the virus again. You're looking at patient 1 and patient 2, the first confirmed COVID-19 cases in Nebraska. Emma and her father Ralph traveled to England back in February of 2020, back when whispers of some kind of contagious disease were only that, whispers.
And it was my dad's 100th birthday that we celebrated.
A few days after they got back, Emma played in a Special Olympics basketball game in Fremont. At the game, she got hit in the head with a ball and was admitted to Methodist Women's Hospital several times for migraines. On March 6th, during her third trip to the hospital, her oxygen levels were very low, one of the first telling signs of a COVID-19 infection.
And we contacted Douglas County Health Department at the time because the UK was not listed on the countries of interest. They were a little apprehensive to test her because she didn't meet the current criteria.
So they did x-rays, and just as a precaution, they did a test for COVID. And then it all went to everywhere from there.
It was confirmed. Emma was the first in the state with COVID-19. Ralph got the news over the phone.
They called me and put the phone to her ear because she couldn't speak. She was still intubated. And the nurse said that she heard my voice and a tear rolled down her cheek.
Later, Emma was transported to Nebraska Medicine, where she spent over a month fighting for her life.
This is when we were still operating like we would have with an Ebola patient or something.
Nebraska Medicine's Dr. Brian Boer cared for Emma, even though proper care for a COVID patient wasn't all that clear.
The biggest unknown was really just how contagious COVID was.
It was tough for him, for all medical professionals, tough for the entire state to wrap their heads around what this first confirmed case meant.
So that was kind of, yes, we were prepared, but I don't think we were prepared for the extent, so to say.
For Ralph, it meant taking a COVID test himself, even though he had no symptoms. Ralph tested positive too. Now, 1 year and over 200,000 cases in the state later, a new hope is prevailing. And almost exactly 1 year to the day that the Hutchinson family tested positive, both Emma and Ralph are now vaccinated, coming full circle from the nightmare that began exactly 1 year ago. Now the Hutchinsons enjoy each other's company virtually. This time, no tears, no frightening diagnosis. This time, full of hope.
I can give a hope to other people I'm a survivor and a fighter.
Ringing into 2021 with a new perspective. Reporting in Omaha.
I love you.
Rudolph Sinaida.
Love you.
Bye.
Bye.
Emma and Ralph are both doing well. They're hoping their story inspires those who may be suffering from COVID-19 now, so people can see how far they've come after such hardship back in 2020. The state of Iowa has been in the virus spotlight throughout much of the pandemic. From the first confirmed case on March the 8th to the first death from the virus 16 days later. Here's a look at COVID-19 from the news headlines here at Siouxland News.
The Iowa Department of Public Health and the State Hygienic Lab confirmed Iowa's first 3 presumptive positive cases of coronavirus.
Breaking news tonight out of Des Moines. Just over an hour ago, Governor Kim Reynolds announced the closure of all Iowa schools for the next 4 weeks.
She ordered all gyms, fitness centers, theaters, casinos, senior centers, and adult daycare facilities in the state to close starting at noon today.
The Siouxland District Health Department announced that first positive case just a few hours ago.
And that breaking news tonight is the first confirmed death linked to the COVID-19 coronavirus in Iowa.
It was an announcement no Iowa governor has ever had to make. Students will not return to the classrooms for this academic school year.
Exactly a month after Woodbury County reported its first case of coronavirus, the county now confirming its first death related to the disease.
The New York Times has placed Sioux City at the top of a list of cities that could be the site of the nation's next COVID-19 outbreak.
555 Tyson plant workers in Storm Lake infected with coronavirus, state officials announced Thursday.
Iowa's State Fair is the latest casualty of the ongoing coronavirus pandemic.
Iowa has surpassed a milestone that no one would have thought of before March. More than 1,000 people in the state have now died as a result of COVID-19.
The Iowa Department of Public Health confirming tonight that a child under the age of 5 has died of COVID-19.
More than a quarter of the state's 432 long-term care facilities have been hit with coronavirus outbreaks, infecting more than 4,000 residents and staff.
Woodbury County recorded its 100th coronavirus-related death overnight.
The first doses of the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine have finally arrived at our local hospitals, even as federal officials debate approving a second vaccine for use.
COVID-19, civil unrest, a drought, a derecho. We've been beaten and battered in about every way imaginable.
Since first receiving COVID vaccinations in the state, Iowa has fully vaccinated over 350,000 residents. Still to come tonight on this special edition of Siouxland News, the duo leading the Siouxland District Health Department reflects on their response to the virus and what's next for Woodbury County. But first,
there's so many decision makers that were involved in the pieces of that puzzle, but no one was stepping forward and saying, this is the final decision.
from mask expectations to feeding thousands of students learning at home, Dr. Paul Gosman opens up about the virus's impact on the Sioux City School District. On Sunday, March 15th, just after 8 p.m., Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds announced she was recommending all Iowa schools close for 4 weeks to help slow the spread of COVID-19. Iowa schools would remain closed to in-person learning for the remainder of the year. Over the summer, schools created return-to-learn plans to help keep students and staff safe for the new school year. These plans included scenarios from in-person learning, hybrid education, and online classes, keeping students and staff safety in mind. Tonight, we revisit one of those plans. The Sioux City Community School District was one of the only large school districts in Iowa to return with in-person classes during the new school year. I sat down with Superintendent Dr. Paul Gosman to look back on an unprecedented school year.
March of 2020, when March 15th to be exact, when Governor Reynolds announced schools would be closing for at least 4 weeks. It wasn't until 6 days later that Sioux City had, or Woodbury County, I should say, reported their first positive case. At that time, did you think that schools would reopen?
We knew that we would eventually close. We actually were most surprised at how early we ended up receiving the announcement from the governor that we were going to close. I think we learned about that on a Sunday, and it was, to apply to the very next day. And so, of course, we were hopeful back in those days that we could find ways to mitigate the challenges of the virus and get kids back in school. But we immediately began working on ways in which we could deliver instruction, food, services to kids and families in the challenges of the pandemic, because we of course, no one knew back then what it was going to be like. We just knew that it was severe.
And in those first few weeks of the pandemic, what was your main concern?
When the pandemic first occurred, we really learned one of our areas of core mission wasn't just academic achievement, but food service. And we immediately began a process where we would get food delivered in a safe way to families, most specifically to kids, any students that are 0 to 18 years of age, in what I believe ended up being 27 different locations about our town. Kind of a second area of focus for us was pushing connectivity out into neighborhoods, because of course academic achievement is our core mission, and so we wanted to do all that we could to reach students as well as we could.
So in the initial drafts of the Return to Learn plan, masks were not required, they were expected. So what I want to know is, why wasn't the decision made right off the top to require masks?
There's so many decision makers that were involved in the pieces of that puzzle, but no one was stepping forward and saying, this is the final decision. I know it was my opinion that the only way we were going to be able to open the buildings and consistently serve students is if we consistently have the same rules and regulations for everybody. The only way that seemed clear to me was with masks on.
So you supported masks being required from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, from August to now, how do you feel the number of cases have impacted the district as a whole?
We had incredible cleaning protocol and of course mandated the masks, which didn't go over well with everybody when we first did it. I think we've become more accustomed to it now. And everywhere possible, and it wasn't possible everywhere, but everywhere we could, we put in more social distancing. And so, yeah, we had a week or two where we had, certainly higher percentages than we would have liked, but we consistently stayed lower in terms of students or staff who were in the district, in their building, and showed signs of the virus on any given week. Our numbers stayed really quite low, and I think that's a credit to them.
Anything you would have done differently this academic school year, or changed?
Oh, interesting question. When the pandemic started, the news of what was changing was almost every couple of hours. And then as we kind of got into March and April, then it became every couple of days things seemed to be changing, and then every couple of weeks. And so, during that early time, things were changing so rapidly that we did everything we could to communicate as thoroughly as possible and to get that information out. Now that I see where we are today, I suspect we could always go back and find ways that we could have improved our digital connectivity to one another. Although I do have to say this district is one that seems to celebrate that in-person experience. And I'm thankful for that, because I think kids learn best when they're in a classroom with the teacher. And when we were finally able to open our doors and welcome people back, you could sense that relief. And while we could have maybe stretched it further with digital offerings, I'm thankful for the school board, the support of the school board, and the work that they did to help us get back into session.
To see my extended interview with Dr. Gosman, visit this story on our website, siouxlandnews.com. Across the river, another school district did things a bit differently. The South Sioux City Community School District implemented a mask requirement within its buildings right away. District officials also kept its most crowded building, the high school, at half capacity for the first half of the school year. High school students were in a hybrid learning plan from August through January, attending class in person every other day. Kindergarten through 8th attended class in person. The district also provided families the opportunity to learn remotely. They were thrust into the spotlight as the virus made its way to Siouxland, leading Woodbury County's fight against COVID-19.
You're just sitting here waiting that proverbial shoe to drop.
The Siouxland District Health Department reflects on one of the toughest years of their careers. Our Vivian Rennie has this exclusive interview. They've become a household name over the last year. The team at the Siouxland District Health Department had to quickly adjust to ever-changing protocols from health officials and questions from the public. Our Vivian Rennie sat down with Director Kevin Green and Deputy Director Tyler Brock for an in-depth discussion on a year they won't soon forget.
How early did you guys start preparing when the first cases were being discovered versus when they actually were implemented here?
I think probably we started when it started to spread more throughout the world, and clearly when it became evident that we were going to get some of that here in America, that it was going to be a person-to-person spread. That was definitely when we started kind of getting our radar up, and it's like, oh, we better figure out what this is, what we've got, and how we've got to talk about it to people. That's really when it started.
Did you guys have any projections on what the cases in Woodbury County or this area could look like? And did we kind of hit those? Like, how did those projections work?
I'll speak for myself. No. Every time we tried to make a projection, we ended up being wrong. You know, I mean, it went from being very plentiful, you know, very high caseloads in the eastern part of the state at the beginning, and here in western Iowa we had virtually nothing. And you know, we were kind of sitting there, you know, we think we're probably going to get some cases, but we had no idea how many.
We had that first case we announced on March 20th of 2020, and I just remember at one point in time a conversation Tyler and I had in the, you know, it was like a week or so after that, and we had not had another positive. And so, you know, we're seeing this unfold in the other parts of the state. And we're kind of you're just sitting here waiting that proverbial shoe to drop. And for a while, you know, it's been like a week to 10 days, and we're like, is there something going on are we going to escape any of this? But all of a sudden then, that first part of April, just a few trickle of cases, and then by about the third week, it just went, you know, through the roof and continued through May.
What were some of the biggest successes that you guys look back over the last year?
Wow, I think it was our partnership response, I would have to say, is one huge success, and that's now carried forward into the vaccine rollout.
As you look back on the last year, is there anything else that you think is important to make sure that the community knows?
When I first started doing this, I thought, you know, the kind of cooperation we had, I just thought that was very common everywhere. But we've come to realize that it's not. And so one of the things I'd like to make sure that the community understands, and I think they do, but just the level of dedication that, you know, the medical community and public safety and everybody, honestly, from businesses to that kind of thing, have really done a lot of work to try to minimize this pandemic. It's been a really difficult situation, and to try to deal with that as best they could has taken a lot of effort from a lot of people.
But also we've had to rely upon community volunteers. So once again, the individuals have been willing and able, and they've done a phenomenal job stepping up to put them in volunteer roles that just help provide guidance to the people. The comments we got that says everybody was friendly. If I had any questions, they could get us answers. That's really a tribute to the volunteers and those that are staffing to do it. And that's what we like to say Siouxland is about.
To see Vivian's full 30-minute sit-down interview with the Siouxland District Health Department, visit SiouxlandNews.com. Woodbury County has been leading the state of Iowa in vaccine rollout, holding multiple mass vaccination clinics. Woodbury County is currently completing vaccinations for those in Phase 1B, including those working in healthcare, education, first responders, and Iowans over age 65. The state of Iowa has opened up vaccinations to those 16 years and older with underlying health conditions. In Nebraska, those working in healthcare, transportation, first responders, educators, and those over the age of 65 are eligible for the COVID-19 vaccine. And in South Dakota, those in Phase 1, A, B, C, and D are eligible for the vaccine, including healthcare workers, care centers, residents, first responders, those 65 and older, and those with high-risk illnesses, and most recently, educators and funeral service workers. For a full comprehensive breakdown of vaccinations in your area, you can visit the vaccine banner at the top of our website, SiouxlandNews.com. South Dakota made national headlines last spring as one of the first states to report a major COVID outbreak. But first,
one Friday we were talking about COVID, and then by Monday schools were closed. We were in full incident command.
Local healthcare workers open up about their struggles against COVID-19 and how the community helped them in their time of need. This virus has changed a lot of lives, but for those who work at Unity Point Health St. Luke's, they came face to face with an enemy no one could predict. Here's Vivian Rennie.
Over the past year, hospitals became a battleground as the nation struggled to keep COVID-19 at bay. Unity Point Health St. Luke shifted everything they could to fight the virus and keep those on the front line safe.
It was here. Our numbers just shot up. We knew it was time, and then everybody just kind of hunkered down.
Last March, healthcare facilities in Siouxland braced themselves for impact.
One Friday we were talking about COVID, and then by Monday schools were closed. We were in full incident command.
Every decision made was centered around COVID-19.
When we put our minds to it, we can change anything in healthcare.
Specialized units were dedicated to those fighting the virus.
A lot of processes were changed, a lot of units were changed. We created new units.
Every day for the past year, local healthcare heroes suited up ready for battle against a new enemy.
A lot of us did many 12, 14, 16-hour days. I mean, physical, mental, emotional, it's a toll on everybody.
Critical care nurses lost patients on scales they had never experienced before.
These people are bleeding out of every orifice. They have lots of complications. They're on a breathing tube. They're on many drips that are keeping them alive moment to moment. It's heavy. You're tired. It was a lot.
While healthcare staff were working to care for those hit hardest by COVID-19, the community was there to offer them a helping hand.
The community really stepped up with providing personal protective equipment, providing meals to our staff, just ensuring that they had the equipment that they needed and the self-care things that they needed.
Well, I think what the community said to us is what we've been saying to them. You matter to this world. They really supported us by saying you matter and did everything they could to help us.
Now, 1 year later, COVID response has become a daily part of life in the hospital.
In the beginning, it was daily, every day, all day long, focused on COVID operations and COVID planning. But as of right now, we are no longer in incident command.
As vaccines are distributed and cases are beginning to decrease, Unity Point Health St. Luke's is working to heal themselves.
Our focus for what is next is really ensuring that our staff heal and have those self-care opportunities that they need to recover from everything that they've been through this last year.
Health officials say that this virus has changed healthcare permanently and in many cases for the better. Mercy One Siouxland Medical Center did not respond to our request for an interview for this story. Outside of Unity Point Health St. Luke's, I'm Vivian Rennie.
South Dakota was one of the first states in the nation to report a major outbreak of COVID-19, putting the Rushmore state under a national spotlight. The state reported its first cases and first death linked to the virus on March 10th. And just a month later, an outbreak was confirmed at the Smithfield Foods plant in Sioux Falls. This outbreak was one of the first to hit meat packers last spring. The plant shut down on April 11th, and the CDC was brought in to investigate its mitigation measures before the plant could reopen. Governor Kristi Noem would host President Donald Trump for a July 4th celebration at Mount Rushmore. And then in August, tens of thousands of people flocked to Sturgis for the annual motorcycle rally. Throughout the pandemic, Governor Noem encouraged civic responsibility instead of stay-at-home and mask orders, urging personal responsibility to help slow the spread of the virus. By December, Avera Health reported that South Dakota had the highest mortality rate from COVID-19 in the nation. They felt the impact of COVID-19 more than most, yet many have found a way to thrive in 2020. Coming up after the break, we check in with local businesses across Siouxland to see how COVID-19 and virus restrictions affected businesses and how they adjusted to a new normal. Businesses across the country and in Siouxland are no stranger to the impact of the pandemic. It's been tough and they've made a lot of sacrifices in the last year. But they've also seen growth and development that wouldn't have emerged otherwise. Jessica Warren spoke with local economic development leaders who say our community has done pretty well during the pandemic.
It's been a very challenging and trying time for businesses across the country and here in Siouxland.
The coronavirus has had an adverse impact on businesses of every kind. We most frequently hear about bars, restaurants, smaller retailers, and some of our service providers.
Chris McGowan is the president of the Siouxland Chamber of Commerce and the Siouxland Initiative. He says while the pandemic hit the national economy hard, that wasn't the case here in the tri-state area. McGowan says their membership has remained steady at approximately 1,400 members. In this time, they have lost both existing members and added new members.
One unique thing that people may not realize is that economic development has continued despite the pandemic. And our economic development pipeline in all three states, Iowa, Nebraska, and South Dakota, remains fairly active.
McGowan says that's because local patrons are showing their support for local businesses, and large businesses continue to invest in the tri-state region.
Sabre Towers and Poles has a $25 million expansion as they add a galvanizing plant right here in Siouxland. And so the companies that continue to make the decision to expand right here at home makes a huge difference in our economy.
What's more, when these companies continue to grow, McGowan says they provide more job opportunities.
They continue to employ our friends, our neighbors, our relatives, and our unemployment rate is now down at or below where it was prior to mid-March of last year when the pandemic emerged.
The city of Sioux City saw a number of businesses opening and closing over the last 12 months. Among the new openings downtown were the Warrior Hotel, Courtyard by Marriott, and Avid Hotels, which provided additional benefits to other local businesses now and in the future.
You know, more venues and more nice hotel rooms and more things than we ever had. It's unfortunate that happened, during this time period, but I think we're well set for the future.
And with the local economy overall faring well, the city's economic development director, Marty Doherty, says that has boosted housing growth as well, with a record number of units built last year.
For the number of years now, we've been opening up new areas. We're seeing great opportunities for different living situations, whether that's downtown housing now. We have a lot of market rate housing coming online downtown.
Doherty says in 2020, the city saw more than 500 new housing unit permits issued. He says that phenomenal housing growth is due in part to low interest rates and high demand.
We think we're on a really good path for growth. We may not see that growth for a couple of years, but we've had some remarkable housing construction numbers, and we're very excited where that's headed.
While some businesses saw hardships amid COVID-19, others saw a boost in business, including a local auto repair shop. Square Tire, with locations in Sioux City, Fremont, and Norfolk, saw a 45% drop in customers during the shutdown last spring. But as the temperatures warmed up in the summer, so did the traffic at the shop.
May 1st to September 30th, that 5-month period that just ended, we actually had our best 5-month period for that period since 2005. Business has gone from, kind of mediocre to actually really good. I've been very fortunate. I've been lucky.
Eldridge cited 3 reasons for the jump in sales last summer: people traveling by car, Siouxlanders keeping their older cars instead of buying new, and many who were working from home were driving more during their personal time. One local business forced to close during COVID-19 was Sneaky's Chicken, leading the owner to write a letter to Governor Kim Reynolds. Back in October, Siouxland News anchor Larry Wentz sat down with Dave Ferris to discuss the pandemic's impact on him and his team.
Since 1979, fried chicken has been the recipe for success at Sneaky's Chicken in Sioux City. And until mid-March, the coronavirus was hardly a thought.
In the beginning, we really weren't too much concerned about it because nobody really knew anything and nobody was really doing anything.
That changed March 17th when Governor Kim Reynolds declared a health emergency that forced the closing of many businesses, including restaurants.
Most businesses like ours, small businesses, run on pretty tight margins.
On May 12th, the frustration that Ferris and many other business owners felt was shared in a letter he wrote to the state's top decision makers.
Mr. Ferris stated, "While I'll always support public health first and foremost, the COVID-19 pandemic has been devastating for our business. Before the pandemic, I was making plans to transition my life's work to my daughter."
As restrictions eased somewhat into the summer, COVID's impact became even more personal, as Ferris, his daughter, and eventually 17 family members tested positive for the virus. Ferris says he's been fortunate to keep all of his staff employed, even giving them raises to help offset the changes they've had to go through to make sure that everyone has an income.
It's been difficult. It was pretty scary, and we're still going through it.
Ferris has one message for everyone who has a favorite place to eat.
I don't care if you're selling hot dogs, chicken, pizza, or spaghetti. If you want them around a year from now, at some point you need to figure out how to get in there safely and go support them and have yourself a meal and a drink and enjoy your evening.
Event venues all over the country have been shut down over the last year, but the team at Sioux City's Tyson Event Center has found creative ways to stay open. Our Yetzka Warren joins us once again for this story.
From concerts to the circus, the Tyson Event Center was the place to be for all kinds of events. But that was before the pandemic hit.
It's been hard to do events in many ways, you know, with restrictions and guidelines and some closure time in there and things of that sort.
And in the last 12 months, they haven't been able to host as many events like prior years due to the pandemic. Tyson Event Center General Manager Tim Savona says after 6 months, they are behind budget by $125,000. And that's not all.
We're projecting that we're going to miss budget by roughly $400,000. Obviously, we're doing everything we can to keep that number as small as possible, but something to be aware of and ready for. We're hopeful it'll be less, but it's not going to be 100. And the reason for that is, I mean, a lot of ways, but the primary reason is we just haven't been able to do what we normally do.
Savona says the event venue industry overall has been struggling because of COVID-19. And in spite of having to adjust to a new norm, they found creative ways to host events like teaming up with Siouxland Youth Hockey, which has provided a great economic impact to the community.
We're renting hourly ice to the youth to be able to play games and practice times and, you know, extra than IBP. So they use IBP, but there's always over demand.
Savona says while they've had to make a lot of cutbacks, this is one of the many events to utilize the venue in a positive way.
Now the ice has just sat there, you know, for 9 straight months. So lots of unique ways to find time to utilize it.
Since July of 2020, Tyson has produced $40,000 of net revenues from their efforts of self-creating.
Our team worked really hard to create events, create concepts, create things to do. So the Hump Day Happy Hour series was one of them. We did it every Wednesday for like a 6-week run in the summertime. They all sold out, which at the time was really exciting because there was nothing happening.
Savona says they'll continue this series again in June. Before that, they've got other events lined up, including graduations and other spring events.
We have a responsibility to this community. We have a responsibility to the Musketeers to host their games every night. We have the NAIA coming here in March. You know, this stuff takes time and planning and effort. And this is a mega building, right? You got to have people here to run it.
In Sioux City, I'm Yetzka Warren, Siouxland News.
Still to come tonight, we dig into COVID's impact on local agriculture. But first, they were the first industry shut down by COVID-19, but local sports found a way to play while keeping athletes, coaches, and fans safe. Our Andrew Rogers has this story coming up. After the coronavirus canceled spring sports, Iowa was the first to attempt summer sports, and for the most part, it went off without a hitch. But then came fall and close contact sports. Our Andrew Rogers breaks down the numbers from Iowa, Nebraska, and South Dakota to find out how much the virus played a role in sports cancellations.
According to a study done by Max Preps, 94% of teams statewide were completely unaffected by a COVID-19 test during the summer months when Iowa tackled both baseball and softball season. Only 4% had their season end prematurely, and even for those teams that did experience a positive test, there were no reported deaths or hospitalizations. All known infections were mild. You could maybe say the way Iowa handled their summer sports provided a blueprint for the rest of the country. However, football season was right around the corner, which led to more uncertainty. To gain perspective on how the season went, we reached out to all three athletic associations in the tri-state. In South Dakota, the SDHSAA handled scheduling and rescheduling and said approximately 94% of all scheduled contests were played. This did not include 14 teams who chose not to participate in the season due to federal or tribal guidance. Throughout the football playoffs, one contest was ruled a forfeit due to COVID-19. That was a first-round contest. In Nebraska, the NSAA was only able to provide fall postseason team participation. For football, 152 teams played in the postseason. Only one team did not play due to COVID-19, which equates to less than 1% of all participating teams. In Iowa, we were unable to reach the IHSAA for fall and winter numbers. Aside from football, other fall and winter sports including volleyball, wrestling, basketball, gymnastics, cross country, golf, and tennis in South Dakota weren't tracked to exact numbers. Nonetheless, the SDHSAA was able to provide a range stating 90 to 95% of all scheduled contests were played. Other fall postseason numbers provided by the NSAA only saw one sport reach above the 0 to less than 1% range in regards to non-participation due to COVID-19. That was volleyball. Out of the 272 teams in the postseason, 9 did not participate due to a run-in with the virus. We also reached out to the IGHSAU for comment, but they did not keep track of those numbers. I was told by an athletic association that did provide statistics that the schools, athletes, and families have done a great job of following the protocols and procedures, and as a result, all state events have happened up to this point. Andrew Rogers, Siouxland News.
Our nation's food producers have had to fight not only outbreaks among staff, but a change in sales and production.
And it put it pretty much in a panic. What am I going to do?
We revisit COVID's impact on agriculture next on this special edition of Siouxland News. They are a key element in our nation's food supply and became one of the hardest hit industries early on. COVID-19 outbreaks spread quickly through meat packing plants nationwide. Tonight, Siouxland News anchor Larry Wentz revisits some of the biggest in our region.
In the spring of 2020, meatpacking plants across the Midwest became the first hotspots for COVID-19 in the country. One of the earliest outbreaks was in March at Smithfield Foods in Sioux Falls, where at least 1,300 of the plant's 2,700 employees tested positive, and 4 had died by September. The plant shut down in April after reporting its first positive case on March 24th. A team from the CDC visited the plant, saying they could not find important information on COVID-19 for employees, where more than 40 different languages were spoken. And Smithfield was cited by OSHA for failing to provide a workplace free from recognized hazards. An outbreak reported at the Tyson Foods plant in Dakota City, Nebraska made the Sioux City metro area one of the fastest growing COVID-19 hotspots in the country last spring. The plant suspended operations on May 1st after more than 750 of its 4,300 employees tested positive, and at least 2 died. The plant implemented stronger preventative measures and more testing, reopening a short time later. Storm Lake in Buena Vista County, home to 2 Tyson food plants, also saw an outbreak of COVID-19 in the spring. 22% of the workforce had tested positive, shutting down the larger of the 2 plants on May 29th. Because of the outbreak, Buena Vista County became one of the fastest growing hotspots for COVID in the nation in early June. At least 1 lawsuit has been filed against the company over the death of an employee. Seaboard Triumph Foods in Sioux City kept its operations moving throughout the pandemic, in spite of an outbreak at the facility where at least 1 employee died from COVID. In April, the plant reported at least 120 cases among its 2,400 employees. In the fall of 2020, a judge ruled that the working conditions at the plant were unsafe and detrimental after some workers filed a lawsuit. Other outbreaks were reported at meatpacking plants across the region, including Tyson Foods in Norfolk, Nebraska, Smithfield Foods in Denison, Iowa, and Tyson plants in Waterloo, Iowa, and another in Columbus Junction. In Waterloo, several managers were fired after news of a COVID-19 betting pool among them was discovered. Several other lawsuits have been filed against the company after at least 6 employees died of the virus at the Waterloo facility. According to the website for the Journal of the National Academy of Sciences, as many as 1 in 12 cases of COVID-19 in the spring were tied to outbreaks at meatpacking plants. With nearly 500 facilities reporting outbreaks by September and more than 200 workers dying.
Agriculture, like just about every other industry, didn't escape the effects of the virus. Now, Siouxland News at Sunrise anchor Jacob Heller takes a look back at some of the unique stories we've told in Proud to be a Hometown Farmer during this pandemic.
In April, we looked at hog producers like Larry Jansen out of Randolph, Nebraska, with nowhere to turn, no options except to kill their pigs because processing plants were shutting down.
It's very tough. I mean, it's not just a money part, it's the mental part that goes with it too. I mean, it's to have to euthanize baby pigs.
And in May, when many dairy farms were forced to dump their milk because they couldn't sell it, MPM Farms near Wayne, Nebraska, was helping out the community, securing a grant to get a brand new fridge for the local food pantry.
And it put it pretty much in a panic. What am I going to do?
In June, we met up with the Feddersen family near Anthony, Iowa, changing the way they marketed and sold their premium Wagyu beef, shifting to online sales, something they've never done before because normal buyers like high-end restaurants were shut down, not buying.
Now I have more overhead and more things to think of, and a lot of different thoughts go through your mind when you don't know what's going to happen, take care of a family.
In July, we met Tim Turner in Sioux City. He used self-isolation early on in the pandemic, more than 300 hours, and built an Instagram-worthy space right in the front yard.
My wife wanted a garden last year, and I gave her 5-gallon buckets on the deck. We enjoyed the garden, but we didn't enjoy the deck. So this year I said, I am a little bit over the top, but why not, right?
And later that month, we learned an international travel and shipping shutdown might have been beneficial for your local flower grower, like Lori Taylor at the Living Treasures Flower Farm near Lamar's.
Since all the airplanes and things were shut down, a lot of the designers and florists couldn't get flowers shipped in, so the demand for locally grown flowers has been a lot higher in that realm as well this year.
The Siouxland community played a big role in pandemic response last year, with many stepping up and volunteering their time to help their neighbors in need. We visit with the Food Bank of Siouxland for this story after the break. Money worries caused by the pandemic last year led to more food insecurity than ever in Siouxland. The Food Bank of Siouxland saw demand for food aid increase by almost 50% in 2020, giving away nearly 1 million more pounds of food than in 2019, a total of 3.5 million pounds. It wasn't just those who've needed food assistance in the past, but many who had never sought help before.
We've had a number of people that have never had to do this before coming to us, calling us, saying, I don't know what to do, how do I do this? In addition to the people that are calling that have never had to do this, we've also had to switch to a drive-through setup. So this year has been very different than previous years.
In December alone, more than 322,000 pounds of food found its way into Siouxlanders' hands. One group that became even more isolated during this pandemic was the homeless community. Our Vivian Rennie sat down with the Gospel Mission back in September to find out what they have experienced and a big problem for them early on, a lack of testing.
We haven't had a single recorded case of a positive test.
It's a community that's often overlooked, but Siouxland's homeless have also been battling COVID-19.
We are a hotbed for viruses.
It can house up to 140 people, so we have to be very cautious not to bring it in.
The Gospel Mission is taking temperatures daily. They've also decreased seating in their cafe, put up walls between bunks, and created 2 infirmaries that will be used to isolate residents if they begin showing symptoms.
If it were to come onto our campus, it would force us to close our doors permanently.
Raymond Nillis entered the shelter amid the pandemic.
My home environment that I was in, where I was renting,
It was more a protective situation, elderly and children around, so I didn't want to expose them. And I just had to change, and this was the only place available for me.
He says despite the virus, he feels safe at the gospel mission.
Basically, due to personal choice, I have not felt exposed to it, but I personally isolated right when it hit back in February.
Woodbury County has nearly 5,000 positive cases, but none of them are confirmed members of the homeless community, and that could be down to a few reasons.
The testing for COVID has been kind of hard for us to secure.
Some new residents have come to the shelter with negative tests, but even that is rare.
How they went about getting tests, I'm not sure.
The Siouxland District Health Department confirmed the lack of testing among that population and knows they can be hard to get for the homeless.
They don't have a payment source. I think their best route is to contact the Siouxland Community Health Center, and they can give them guidance and also the financial support to be able to get tested.
This trend isn't isolated to Siouxland. Other gospel missions around the country have also reported to be COVID-free.
And some of those missions are running and have been running at 200% capacity since COVID. And in our association, there's not one COVID case.
As winter months tend to fill up the shelter, social distancing will be harder to maintain. But for now, residents like Nillis are happy they have a place to go.
It's a very protected, it's kind of like its own bubble.
At the Gospel Mission, Vivian Rennie, Siouxland News.
Now that a year has passed, what can we expect for the future with COVID-19? We dig into that after the break. The past year is one that will be in history books for generations to come. But now that a year has passed with COVID-19, what comes next? Operation Warp Speed has a goal of getting COVID-19 vaccines into the arms of all Americans who want one by May. With 3 vaccines currently approved for emergency use, health officials hope that the country can return to a sense of normalcy soon. Dr. Anthony Fauci, the nation's top infectious disease expert, says Americans can expect to see mask wearing as a commonplace into next year, with a handful of new strains of the coronavirus found throughout the world. Many health experts say COVID-19 could become an annual virus, much like the flu. Thank you for joining us tonight for this special 1-hour edition of Siouxland News, COVID-19, a year in Siouxland. If you missed any part of this broadcast or want to watch it again, you can find it on our website, siouxlandnews.com, and also on our YouTube page as well. Have a great night.